All right, like the previous chapter or two, a lot of these proverbs are connected together. So, for example, verse, I think 4 and 5 are a set, and 6 and 7 go together, 8 through 10. There are several other sets of individual verses that are actually paired with another one for a single proverb. So let's just start at the beginning of the chapter and work our way down. Let's see, in verse 1, it says, "These are the Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied." There's actually a surprising lot we can learn from that. And it's not a proverb, of course, it's an introduction to this set of Proverbs. But I don't know if I think that everyone here, except maybe Scott, was here when we did the first episode, whatever you want to call it, for Proverbs. And I talked about how Proverbs is divided up into 7 books. And I think 4 of them are written by Solomon. One is possibly adapted by Solomon from an Egyptian sage. And then there's King Lemuel, who might actually also be another name for Solomon. But this is the beginning of the 3rd book of Solomon's Proverbs. The first 2 are, well, the first one is in chapters 1 through 9. And then the 2nd book of Solomon's Proverbs is chapter 10 through chapter 22, verse 16. And then you've got the section with Amena, whatever his name was, the Egyptian guy. And now we're back into Proverbs of Solomon. So this is the 3rd book of Solomon. But one thing we can learn from this is that, Solomon didn't just write all his Proverbs down in a book and hand them over. He might have written down maybe the first book, maybe even the 2nd book. He probably wrote that book from Amenamapi because he adapted it, or Amenamapi adapted it from him, whichever way it was. It's something that he wrote down, and other kings who lived at about the same time were able to read it and use it. But this piece of Solomon's Proverbs coming after that and being copied by Hezekiah means that all of the last from here on out was not compiled, at least by Solomon, and was compiled at a much later date and then added to what Solomon had already written. Now, these are Solomon's Proverbs. I'm not saying that weren't created by Solomon, but he spoke them in court, and a scribe wrote them down in the court records, or he wrote them in a letter or something like that. And then Hezekiah commissioned a group of men to go and find them all and compile them. First Kings mentions that, Solomon wrote 3,000 Proverbs or something like that. And it's probably a round number. He probably didn't actually write 3,000. It might have been more or less. But we certainly don't have anywhere near that many in the book of Proverbs. So there are other Proverbs of Solomon out there somewhere that we don't have. And maybe they don't exist anymore. But at least in the time of Hezekiah, there were still sayings of Solomon or writings of Solomon that were kind of scattered around, maybe in royal records or something like that. And the later parts, the book of King Lemuel, the stuff that he heard from his mother in Proverbs 31, and the Proverbs of Agar or whatever his name is right before that. I can't remember those names right now, sorry. Those were either written or at least compiled at a later date. So that just tells us the whole book of Proverbs wasn't a single thing written all out at once. It was something that people compiled over a long period of time, over many centuries. And that doesn't make it not inspired. It just means that that's the way these kinds of books are compiled. The Psalms are the same way. It's probable that Isaiah's prophecies were written in lots of separate scrolls and then later compiled by his disciples or their disciples somewhere down the road. Anyways, I thought it was just interesting that how much you can gain about the history of a book just by a little line stuck in the middle of it like that.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, on to verse 2. The glory of a king of God to conceal things, but the glory of a king is to search it out. And this is linked somewhat with verse 3. But they're not exactly saying the same thing. I think verse 3 is actually kind of a mirror of verse 2, where verse 2 is saying, on the first part, it's saying that it's the glory of God to conceal things. God has created this amazing universe, and he knows everything. There's nothing that happens anywhere that he doesn't know. So it's not like he has to search anything out. Elsewhere, I think Solomon said that, God searches the hearts of all men. And of course he does, in a manner of speaking, but he knows the hearts of all men. He doesn't have to rummage through them to find out what he needs to know. Instead, God conceals things from us. And scripture says that God dwells in deep darkness. And partly that's a metaphor because he is mysterious. We can never understand him. And so he holds himself back, partly because we can't understand him anyways, but partly also for our own protection. And this goes back to Deuteronomy 29:29. Let me, it had my other Bible app already ready. Deuteronomy 29:29, which says, "The secret things belong to Yahweh our God, but the things revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may follow all the words of this law." So God has chosen to reveal some things to us, but not everything. And the things that he has revealed are things that are to help us, manuals for life, how we can live according to his standards, what our purpose are, things like that. Purpose is. But the things he's hidden are things that are dangerous or forbidden. One of the definitions of the Hebrew word for witchcraft, which I can't remember the name right now, but it shares a root with a word that means secret or hidden, and which is where we get the word for occult, which also means hidden. And so the idea of witchcraft might be referring to things, delving into things that God has hidden and forbidden for us to go. So it is possible to go and speak to the dead, but God said, don't do that. That's something that God has hidden. It may be possible to use divination, to throw chicken bones or read the stars, things like that. But God has said, don't do that. We can watch the stars in the sky for signs, but we're not to read them like horoscopes do. We're not to use them to tell the future or to learn messages from spirits or anything like that. But on the other hand, the glory of a king is to search things out. In part, this is talking about things that God has concealed, not things that he has forbidden, but things that he hasn't revealed necessarily. There's a lot that God has chosen not to tell us. In part, that's so that we have the work of figuring it out. And where this really applies to a king, in part, Solomon was also known as a naturalist. So there are lots of things that Solomon spent his time researching and discovering, searching out God's secrets in the world that he created. And those things aren't necessarily revealed in scripture, but Solomon had the wealth, the resources, and the time to search those things out where most people, they were just barely getting by. Not where I was going. I was actually talking about the law. God has given us laws, instructions on how to live, but a lot of those laws are ambiguous, so that we have to work together to try to figure them out. And so that we have to think about our circumstances and extrapolate from what God has told us into what he hasn't told us. And that is particularly important for someone like a king who is judging other people's crimes. If people come to him with a dispute about the law, he has to be able to reason through it and extrapolate from the things that God has revealed into those things which are still hidden, so that he can apply the law in situations that the law doesn't directly address. And I'm off to a loquious start. I just made up that word though. So don't look it up in a dictionary. Yeah, Paula says that was my sermon for the night.
Take it away, Carlos.
Yeah. So verse 3. If anybody has thoughts on verse 2, feel free to speak up. But I'm curious if anybody has some thoughts on verse 3 and how that relates back to verse 2.
I do. Verse 2, about concealing himself. With Moses in the wilderness, he had Moses hide himself in the cleft of the rock, and he only showed his backside to Moses. So he concealed it. He concealed himself, and but he had Moses seek him out, despite despite concealing himself. But the glory of God was still upon Moses when he came back from that visitation, because they couldn't even look upon his face. He had to put a veil over his face.
Hmm.
So that's another principle too, that God veils himself not to try to hide himself from us, but because if we were to look upon God, we would die. He is that holy. And we are living in a profane world, a common world where everything is um
Mhm.
it's just full of sin, it's full of the curse. The ground was cursed because of Adam. Not mankind was not cursed. It was the curse of sin that came upon the land also as well. I mean, Adam fell into sin. The curse of sin, of course, is having to die, having to sacrifice animals for atonement. Moses and them, and in the Levitical priesthood. But anyway, the heart of kings is unsearchable, because even though God, we can search him out. We can search him out. But the thing is about searching your own heart as a king is you're around pleasures all the time as a king, as a leader. You're around a comfort life. You're living in a comfort zone. And God does not operate in a comfort zone. So the heart of kings is unsearchable, because it's it's like you're in that comfort zone, like I was saying, and
Hmm.
you're used to having the luxuries, and everything's in your way of distraction. Everything's distraction with being a leader. You're distracted by the world, the affairs of the world, and everything in it. And you cannot search your heart if you're distracted. That's
Interesting.
that's my take on it.
Yeah. So you're seeing that as the king being his heart being unsearchable to himself. Okay.
Not to
Interesting.
God. God knows his heart,
Yeah.
and it's continually wicked according to Scripture.
Yeah. And you know that you know what you're saying about how when Moses came down from the mountain, he had to veil his own face.
Hmm.
In a way, that was because some of God had rubbed off on him. You know, God concealed himself for Moses' protection,
That's right.
but Moses had absorbed so much of that power, even just briefly seeing God's backside, so to speak, that when he came down from the mountain, he had to hide part of himself for the protection of the people.
Yes. Yes.
Makes me think that there are people who live extremely holy lives, are very close to God. I'm not really sure I've ever met somebody like that. But I think that the closer to God's ways you are living, the harder it is for the world to understand you. And that's true for everybody. Eventually, you get to the point where you and the world have very little ground for communication. Nothing makes sense. Like you don't understand them, they don't understand you. And I wonder, people use that phrase, too heavenly minded to be of any earthly good. I don't really think that's what they mean by it. They mean people who are holier than thou. But I think there is a point where somebody who is that close to God isn't really suited anymore for the mundane tasks of life. I mean, would Moses have made a good farmhand at that point? Probably
If
not.
you,
His time was better used as a national judge.
yeah. And then there was Aaron. Aaron became that kind of figure as well after Moses refused to do it. And then Aaron gets anointed as the high priest. And of course, they have the curtain constructed to conceal the Ark of the Covenant
Hmm.
from the high priest and everybody, until a certain time, of course, where they had to put the blood on the mercy seat. But the curtain was always there until Yeshua came. Praise God.
Hmm.
I go
Yeah,
with the
that's.
concept of Yeshua spoke in parables.
Hmm.
there was a reason that he spoke in parables. It somewhat winnowed people out. You had to have a desire and a commitment to try and understand what he was saying. So basically, you had to do a leap of faith, so to speak, that his parables warranted pondering, consideration, and you didn't just slough them off as to Yeshua was just talking again. And okay, if you were going to get close or closer to God, you had to effort to dive in and understand the secrets that he was revealing. I mean, it's sort of like the whole Bible. I mean, they say there are 4 levels: the remez, the shah. I don't remember them all, but and you can take it at face value. You can dig in deeper and try to apply it to yourself, or apply it to the nation, or you can get mysterious with it. That's how I look at it with regards to searching things out.
Yeah, that's good. I like the connection with the parables there. He was definitely hiding things from people who weren't ready for it or who didn't want it.
Right.
There is something I did learn about you're talking about parties, the acronym Peshat, then there's Sod,
Right.
and Remez, and then, yeah, I got what you're saying there. The parables were really deep, and that Yeshua taught about. I do agree there. But there's things that sometimes we're not supposed to dig into on the Sod level because we're not either ready for it or God has not revealed it yet. So that's my take.
Yeah, I suspect that after the resurrection, we'll have a lot more access to that kind of thing. But there will still be things that God will hide from us for our own protection. But I think Daniel's observation about the king being unable to search his own heart is valid and certainly true. I read that a little bit differently, though. In verse 2, it's the king who is searching things out, including the hearts of his people. So it's his job to know people's motivations and to try to understand people's character when they're coming to him with a dispute. The character of the people bringing the dispute is almost as important as the evidence itself, the tangible evidence, I mean. But from the other way around, the king's heart is unsearchable for the people who are bringing their case before him, or at least it should be. Because if they understand his heart too much, if he reveals too much, then he'll be easier to manipulate. They'll be able to bribe, present themselves, customize their presentation so that they'll like him better. If they know that his favorite color is yellow, then, showing up in a yellow robe, maybe the king will be a little more disposed towards you or something. I mean, that's a little trivial, but just to illustrate the point.
I think that's a good point. I think that like the other side of it is also that like the more people know that the king, like if people know him well, the tendency to treat him casually would be there. So there's that kind of thing too, which like, we see that kind of stuff in our modern day happen a lot. And just like with, the King of Heaven, we're not supposed to treat him casually. He's set apart, and it's the same kind of thing. Like kings have to be set apart. They have to be less accessible. It's just the way it is.
So Paula, you've gone to enough churches that I'm sure you've heard Abba God or Papa God. You've heard people refer to God in that fashion. Do you think that's appropriate?
I think it really depends on how they look at their relationship with her. And so I don't think that it's necessarily wrong. I just think, for me, that's not necessarily like how I would, pray or whatever, address God. But, You can't judge how close somebody is to God. And
Yeah, I've taken
and
that
that
tack
kind of thing.
before. I've taken that tack before, but I have reconsidered, and I still am reconsidering it, or reconsider it, because even Solomon had to have reverence for David. There was a certain protocol that was put upon him, and I'm not sure how that looks. When I tend to think of God as, Abba, Papa God, that type of an attitude, I take him out of that area of reverence. I think that I need to keep him in. I haven't noodled it all the way through, but it's something that certainly need to ponder.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that there's probably, something to those things. It's like, as we grow up, we don't always call our parents by the same terms that we
Right.
called them when we were, younger.
Right.
So there's stuff like that too, like how we see them and how we address them and how we interact with them changes. So
are you guys saying that the way we called out to him can change our attitude towards him? You're saying that if I use Father or Abba, I can take him subconsciously or eventually and take away the fact that he is the creator and the king, and bring him a level lower than that, is what you're saying?
I'm not saying that. That's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
I don't know.
I'm
Can't speak for Scott.
saying, yeah, I'm saying that's something to consider. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think there is a limit to it. Like there is that tendency for people to interpret the term Abba as daddy. I think, primarily it was more like what we would use as dad or something like that. I mean, it's in Aramaic, it didn't necessarily mean daddy, but it could. But if people use that too casually and they start thinking of God, the ultimate power in the universe, is just daddy who can give him an allowance and, buy him some ice cream, that's when you're in danger. And especially when you do take him casually, no matter what name you use, people do think that they know God. And they start justifying their behavior, saying, well, God wouldn't really object to that. I had an atheist reply to one of my tweets lately, sometime this week, and his comment was, surely God wouldn't send, Muslim children and atheist children and these whatever Hindu children to eternal torment. And it's like, you don't really know God, so it's not up to me what God's going to do. I mean, I may have my opinions, but really God is the one who calls the shots. His universe, his rules. And when people think that they know him and start treating him too casually, I think they forget that.
No, I can agree with the being too casual and things like that. But I think also if you call him like God, or the way people, I'm not talking about us, I'm talking about like other people, if they see God, they may see him like in this old man in the sky, that it's not a. But if you say Father, my heavenly Father, and I do call him Abba occasionally, but when I pray, I do say Father, because Yeshua called him Father. Now, that's his Father.
And Abba.
And Abba, yeah, exactly. I think that to me justifies it that you can. I think before I used to say just God before, when I wasn't too close to him when I prayed. But now that I'm closer to him, I call him Father. I'm not, again, this is not an argument whether this, that, or the other, right? I mean, we're just having a discussion, right? But if you guys heard me before in the past, I like to use the father-son analogy a lot. Now, if the ones of us who've had a good father in their lives, it's easier to understand God, in my opinion, because your father, earthly father, being a good father, he has loved you, and he has instructed you, and he has disciplined you. The scriptures are very clear on that same thing, that God loves you, he gives you instructions, and sometimes he disciplines you, and he disciplines you because he loves you. So to me, calling him father is that sense too, but I think it relates a lot to my relationship between me and my earthly father. Like, yes, I'm older and he's older, but to this day, I don't want to embarrass or disappoint my dad,
Mhm.
my father. So in the same way, when I think about my heavenly father, I also don't want to disappoint him and embarrass him either. To me, that kind of makes sense. Just
Mhm.
a thought, but I'll leave it there before we get off course.
Good.
My take,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Daniel.
My take is, I'll say Hashem in public, but I won't say Hashem in private. I say Abba in private because when you talk to God, when you're having a personal prayer life with, and even Yeshua taught the Lord's Prayer typically, which was actually a form of the Amidah, but prayer. But he said, Father, my Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And he goes on, but he says, my Father, in all his prayers, he's talking to the Father. And I look at it like it's a personal thing because I mean, even Yeshua did it in public, but he was the Father in the flesh. So he had that he had that glory about him that he could do such things. But I think you look at the disciples after Yeshua died and was resurrected and ascended, they didn't go around saying the Father this and the Father that. They didn't say that. They said Yeshua or Hashem or something along that lines. They wouldn't say my Father so and so. I mean, you look at Acts and beyond. After Yeshua had ascended, you'll see what I'm talking about. But I say Hashem because of course, the name Yud-Hey has so many different renderings to it, and I don't want to drag it under. That's my conviction. I don't want to drag
Yeah,
the name
I've
of
been to
God into.
churches that I've heard people praying in churches, Papa. They'll call him Papa or Daddy
Oh yeah,
God, or and
yeah,
it's
that's a no there.
it's a little too nicknaming.
That's why I said I just keep it in private.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think, what Paula was saying about how it's not really so much the name that you're using, or the label title. I mean, all of these things we're talking about are titles rather than a name like we normally think of it. It's not so much that the title that you're choosing to use, but the attitude behind it.
Yeah.
So if somebody is calling God Daddy in the sense that they're appealing to an authority figure who loves them and they're trying to humble themselves in that kind of attitude, I don't think that's a problem. But
It's a
if they're
problem
doing it
in a church setting, though, Jay, because it's appropriating a personal relationship in a public forum.
yeah,
So I think
there's a chance that that's some kind of a bit of showmanship, saying, look
Right.
look at this special relationship I have with God.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
certainly that kind of danger.
hmm
Okay, so have we exhausted God being concealed or concealing things?
Probably not, but we should move.
Okay. All right. So verses 4 and 5, the silver and the dross.
Yeah, when I read that one, what came to mind, first thing that came to mind was King Josiah and how he removed all the wickedness from the kingdom.
Mhm.
He's considered the most righteous king, correct? In 2 Kings chapter 23, verses 11 through 14, I think I'm not going to read it, but it goes down on everything on all the things that he removed and so on. And then in
Mhm.
chapter and verse 25, it says, and like unto him, there was no king before him that turned to the Lord, to Yah with all his heart, with all his soul, and with all his might, according to all the law of Moses. Neither after him arose there any like him. So that's kind of what it reminded me when I saw that. And it's kind of the same thing in our lives. Whenever we remove that stuff from us, then there's no room for that. So we have righteous in our lives. But it reminded me that of King Josiah and his righteousness by removing all the bad stuff from the kingdom.
Yeah, and that is the the immediate context of what Solomon is saying here is in the court of the king. And yeah, not just his court, but the whole nation. If he wants to have a peaceful and prosperous kingdom, then get rid of the dross. And the dross is the idolatry, the corruption in the courts. Yeah, other kings tried to do it. Even Josiah didn't really finish the job. He still left some of the high places.
Yep. But that, to me, when I read that too, it kind of takes, and I don't want to get complacent, but it does take the pressure off, because I think you mentioned this, Jay, in one of your YouTube videos, where God doesn't expect you to be perfect. He just wants you to try to be perfect, but he knows you can't be perfect in that sense, right? And that, I think that some people, and I know because I'm around them, they stress themselves out to get everything so right sometimes on the little things as they read the scriptures. For those of us who are new to unleavened bread, we may take that a little bit too extreme on throwing away certain things that may not be thrown away, or things like that, or freak out if you just touch something leavened but you don't eat it, or things like that. And when those things happen, I just remind them, it's like, look, we're still, for some of us, we're still babies and little children walking into faith. We're not going to get it overnight. Like, don't stress yourself out. Like a good father, earthly father, looks after his children and is just happy that they're trying to be obedient, even if they don't get it right. So is God the same way. And King Josiah, he didn't get everything right, but he was still seen as righteous, which tells you that, look, you don't have to be perfect, but seeing that you're consistently trying to seek after his ways. And that's what happens when you are in love with someone, like truly in love, is you, regardless of how many times that person fails you, you keep encouraging that person to do better the next time. And here King Josiah did a lot of good things, and yes, he didn't get it all right, but he was still considered as righteous. And I think that gives that shows how graceful and merciful the Father is. And hopefully, and I think we need to talk about that some more, understanding and always pointing out that doesn't give you a get out of jail free card to be a scoffer at his ways, but understand that, look, whatever you did in the past, it's in the past. Yes, are there ramifications from that? Absolutely. But you can rest in him, knowing that those things are in the past, and that you can start walking with him in righteousness. And you may stumble a little bit, but that's okay. The whole point of it is to keep moving forward, walking side by side with him, knowing that he's slightly walking in front of you, not leaving you behind, and removing that dross from your heart.
Yeah, and it can be a long process. I mean, it's definitely a lifelong process.
Sure.
Even if you talk about literal silver, it doesn't matter how long you keep the silver in the furnace, it will never be totally 100% pure. As long as the silver is on this earth and not in a sealed vacuum, it's going to keep getting impurities. Even as you remove impurities, it's going to get some more. It's just going to absorb things from the air and from the fuel you're using to heat it, or from the container that it's in. There's always going to be something. And yeah, there's a goal. God has given us a target to aim for. And like Romans, what is it? Romans 10:4 that talks about how Yeshua is the end of the law. It's not talking about the termination of the law, but the focus, the main point, but also the target or the aim of the law. And part of what we can take from that is that keeping the law is moving us closer to him, closer to becoming like him, so that Yeshua is the goal of keeping God's commandments. Not the Yeshua, the person, but Yeshua in us, or us becoming more like him, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, that the whole aim, what you're aiming for matters. It matters to God. And I think that's why we see kings like Josiah who didn't get it all right. And there's so many other examples. I was reading some of the stories just in the last week thinking so many examples of people not getting it right. And God either chooses them or says something good about them. And it's a blessing to know that, but it's also about where their heart was and the direction they were headed and trying to go, and their intent of continuing to pursue that versus that straddling the fence kind of thing that we know is not acceptable to him.
Yeah, I think this proverb also still applies in the public sphere today. In our culture, it's not generally considered acceptable when a new leader comes in to purge all of the old people from the old regime. That's just generally not something that we do in America, or in the United States of America, I should say. But historically, that's how most countries operate. When you get a new ruler, he kicks out all the old guys' people, in part because he needs his own people to be loyal, and they're going to be loyal if he appoints them and he knows that he can trust them. But there is, even in a so-called democracy, there is a call for that kind of thing sometimes. When all of your courts and all of your appointed officials are corrupt, if you've got the opportunity, get rid of them. Might have some chaos for a while, but I think it'll be worth it. We've had presidents who have tried to get rid of or to clean house over a period of time, one in just recent memory.
You mean draining the swamp?
Yeah, something like that.
Right,
But
with a flag.
if you've got a swamp to drain and all you do is pull a bathtub plug, you're not going to get anywhere. You're going to need bulldozers and some demolition equipment and some industrial pumps, because there's a lot of effluvia in that swamp. You can look that one up. That one's in the dictionary.
What to say? Is that a word?
Yeah, it's not a polite word.
I noticed something too. The dross from the silver, we come about the heart. There's a scripture that says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever's in our heart comes out of our mouths. So our mouths can be a vessel for good or evil, depending on how much dross we got in our hearts.
Yeah, and it is important to let God clean all that dross out.
Yeah.
And we complain about the hard things that come in life, but God sends them for a reason.
Yeah.
Not everything bad that happens to you is God trying to build your character. A lot of bad things that happen are just, other people being evil. But God does use all the bad stuff in life to help develop you into who he needs you to be. He can use all that bad stuff if you trust him.
Yes.
And it can be painful, but that's where trust comes in.
Amen.
There's a passage from Isaiah that I wanted to reference here. It's from Isaiah chapter 1, and he's talking about Judah and how Judah has become corrupt. He says, see how the faithful city has become a prostitute. She once was full of justice, righteousness used to dwell in her, but now murderers. Your silver has become dross, your choice wine is diluted with water. Your rulers are rebels, partners with thieves. They all love bribes and chase after gifts. They do not defend the cause of the fatherless. The widow's case does not come before them. Therefore, Adonai, Yahweh Almighty, the mighty one of Israel, declares, Ah, I will vent my wrath on my foes and avenge myself on my enemies. I will turn my hand against you. I will thoroughly purge away your dross and remove all your impurities. I will restore your leaders as in days of old, your rulers at the beginning. Afterward, you will be called the city of righteousness, the faithful city. And God was promising that he was going to send some very hard times on Israel, or on Judah in this case. That there would be war, there would be famine, all kinds of terrible things were going to happen because Jerusalem, the people and the rulers, had abandoned God. And so he wasn't going to abandon them, but he was going to turn away from them for a while. In effect, he was going to hide himself so that he could burn away some of their dross. And God will always preserve a remnant of his people. He will never completely destroy Jacob, but he will put a fire under them and burn a whole lot of them away until he's got a faithful remnant again.
So like the 40 years in the desert.
Yeah. Yeah. All the time in Egypt, really. I mean, I think that all that time of slavery was God burning away some dross. He was building Israel into a people that he could have a relationship with. And the
Right.
wilderness was teaching them about that relationship after he had, purified them somewhat. Of course, then they go into
It makes
Canaan and, they're dumped into the trash heap again.
that makes me think all the stories we read about them and the time in the wilderness. What the heck were they like before? Like for him to be like saying,
Mhm.
okay, now I can like make these people my people. I'm like, if he was using slavery, their enslavement to like try to burn off some dross, I'm like, how corrupted had they gotten? I'm not suggesting that we don't live with the same kind of problems. We're living in the
Mhm.
same world, but it's just kind of interesting to kind of see it that way.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's true of everybody that God uses. All of anybody that God sends on a mission, whether it's a people or an individual or an organization or whatever it is, don't look too closely because you're not going to like what you find if you look too closely. But God can still use them despite all of those flaws.
Yep, absolutely. But I think that's another good reason, like to really think about like a lot of the things that Yeshua said, but also the standard that God has for us.
Mhm.
And because when we start to like judge other people by those standards, we also have to judge ourselves by those standards. So if if we're watching other people too closely and judging them by God's standards, and we're forgetting to do that to ourselves, and then it can be a real hot mess of not wanting to see them as people who are doing God's work.
Yep. Yeah, I have a real hard time with some Sunday Christian pastors. And I don't use the term Sunday Christian derogatorily. I just mean it as pastors who have not completely embraced God's law the way that I think they should. I need some label to refer to them. There are a lot of them that I really respect, and obviously I don't agree with them all, or they would be Saturday Christians instead of Sunday Christians. And of course, I'm always right.
Yes, you are, dear.
Yes, but yeah, we
That's a
haven't
good
gotten to
way
that
to
verse
end.
yet, Paula. Hey, where was I going with that? But there are some that really rub me the wrong way, and I don't want to name any names or anything, but I don't understand how they come to the conclusions they do reading the same Bible. Like, how do you read this and then come up with this as a strategy for evangelizing? Pastors who will embrace or never openly condemn transgenderism or homosexuality, not because they don't think it's a sin, but because they want to bring those people into their church to minister to them. And so they will not defend those behaviors so much as attack people who are condemning those behaviors. And so it appears like they're on the opposite side. And I don't know their hearts. I mean, I can't say whether these people are saved or not saved or whatever. And maybe this is really something that God has told them to do. And it's just a matter of a different emphasis on God's word. But I can't, I mean, every time I interact with them, I feel like these are the enemy. These are not God's people, and they're masquerading as God's people. But I can't really know that. So it's really hard to give those people the benefit of the doubt. And now I don't remember what you said, Paula, that made me go down that path. But
I have no idea.
we're not going to be able to get to the whole chapter. I mean, we never managed to talk about anything in one of the Proverbs chapters, but we're going to get to even less than usual tonight, I think.
Can I bring up two verses that I just scratched my head at?
Sure.
The verse about, I'm trying to find it, not going into a person's house. Oh, where is it?
That's
That
towards
just
the end.
Yeah, I know. It strikes me as odd.
I think
Don't
that just
become too
means
familiar.
don't become too familiar. Yeah.
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 But don't you want to be familiar to your neighbor?
Yes and no.
Yeah, verse
I
17.
think that there are boundaries. I think that being too familiar can be a problem. It can lead to problems.
Yeah, being too present.
Mm-hmm.
Verse 16 and 17 are a proverb together. So if you find honey, eat just enough, too much of it, and you will vomit. Seldom set foot in your neighbor's house, too much of you, and they will hate you.
Yeah.
And it's saying that no matter how charming you are, people don't want to see you every day, all day long. They don't want to hear you. They need a break. Doesn't matter how much you like somebody, you need time away from them sometimes.
Yeah, okay. The other one that I had a question on is whoever sings songs to a heavy heart is like one who takes off a garment on a cold day and like vinegar on soda. I thought that would be a good thing, to try. David did it to Saul. I'm interpreting singing a song to a heavy heart as you're trying to encourage them. And yet it seems to not be a positive thing in this verse.
Yeah, I'm not sure. There is certainly a time when, songs can definitely be encouraging, and music is a powerful tool. It can energize you. It can make you sad. It can make you happy. So I don't think it's so much about just, trying to encourage somebody with songs. I think maybe it's about being too cheerful. I'm trying to think of an example.
So you're not reading you're not reading your audience, is what it's saying. That's what you think.
Yeah, if somebody just died, and a good friend, his wife or her husband or whatever just died, and you go over to the house and you start singing Carpenter songs, that might just really irritate them. Can't you see that I'm in mourning here? Why are you singing about rainbows and butterflies? Yeah, you just have to know the person, I think, and the situation and what kind of cheer. Or if you waltz into their house and you say, wow, what a beautiful day it is, have some cookies. It's like, don't you know that, my spouse just died? I think that's really what it's getting at.
Yeah, and I don't think it's saying encouraging someone is wrong. It's definitely more that, like, the reading the room thing. It's much more about like know who
I
you're.
hadn't thought of it that way. That's a good way of couching it. So thank you.
Carlos, were there any particular proverbs in here that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, back up top, they're just going on pace with it. It's 6 and 7. Do not put yourself forward in the king's presence or stand in the place of the great. For it's better to be told, come up here, than to be put lower in the presence of the noble. Now, I try to, in the workplace in corporate America, it's not always the easiest to be living in, trying to live in righteousness and trying to live in that world. Very worldly, right? Especially if you have to go into the office and all these things. You deal with a lot of different characters, personalities, and cultures and things like that. And we've all heard the phrase, like, moving up the corporate ladder. And if anybody's been in corporate America for a certain period of time, it's not just about doing good work. Like, you can be the best at your job and still not move up the corporate ladder. It
Mhm.
requires much more than just being good at your job. It's going above and beyond, which that's a famous phrase, but it's also you have to be part of that inner circle. You have to,
Mhm.
and I always keep forgetting, I think because I dislike this so much, and I always forget. My bosses used to tell me this all the time. I know if Danielle was here, she'll remember what it is, but they will always tell me like you have to be seen, something like that.
Mhm.
And you have to be, people have to see you. And I'm like, well, what else do they need to see me as? I mean, I do the job, like really well. I'm always on time. I come below budget, all these things, right? But you still need more, right? So you have to do all these extra projects, and you have to do all these social projects as well, all these employee resource groups and all these things in order for people to constantly see you in order to do that. So it's different. You have to put yourself in front of the king consistently in
Mhm.
order for them to see you, which is just the total opposite of what this
Right.
is. And when I've read this, I've take it to heart. So I don't do that at work. I don't put myself in front of the king and all these other things. So because of that, you can argue that my career probably hasn't gone as forth as others, but we've had multiple layoffs at work in the last few years, and I'm still there, right? And I'm
Mhm.
still just got a new role or whatever, and even if I may not understand, even if I see the world go in a certain way, I still try to stick to the scriptures, because if it says that not to put yourself in front of a king, instead it's better to be called. To me, that's better. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't have to open your mouth and say, hey, I'm interested in another role or anything like that, but you shouldn't be like, hey, look at me, like constantly trying to do that. And
Mhm.
I think there, one of the things that you said is that, I can't remember the exact word you used, Jake, but ambiguous, probably you said, that we have to work
Mhm.
through these things. And I thought about Esther when I read these verses, how she actually, part of the law was not to put yourself in front of the king, is to wait. But she didn't do that, right? She
Mhm.
went ahead and did it anyway. And through that engagement, she ended up saving her people, right? So that came from a little push from her uncle, was it Mordecai, saying, hey, look, if you don't do this, you may not even be able to make it either out of
But
this.
she still had to wait for the king to allow her to approach him. She did
Right.
have to wait for him to extend his hand or rod or something like that.
But
Which
she
sort
would
of,
be, but to my understanding, she wasn't even able, supposed to be seen, but she at least made her presence known, and then the king called her over, but she
right,
wasn't even
okay.
supposed to do that. So I guess what I'm saying is that there's this discernment, and that there's a certain type of action that you need to take on these things. So that's
Mhm.
what I thought when I read those two faces. Like that she came up to the mind quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good connection. And I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with ambition or wanting to get ahead. And part of the key here is just being humble. And I don't think that humility necessarily means thinking less of yourself or always pretending to be less than who you are, but
Right.
knowing who you are and what your position is. And in the case with Esther, she knew it was not her place to go barge into the king's throne room, but she also knew that God had put her in a position where if she didn't do that, people were going to suffer. So she had to humble herself to, get over her fears, which, it's a different kind of humility. It might look like pride in the eyes of some people, but it actually is humility because she put her own life below that of others. One thing I was thinking, in the workplace, I know for a long time, my name got in front of a lot of people at work, not because I wanted it to, but because of the thing that, my area of expertise was just very high visibility. And so all the directors, all the managers, they all knew who I was, and, they would contact me directly. And, I've moved into a role where I'm a little more removed from the end users. So I don't have that direct contact anymore, but they all still know me. They all still know my name. And, I get assigned these, in the ticketing system, when you've got a problem, you call the help desk, they create a ticket in the software and they assign it to a work ticket, if you know what I mean. And so I get assigned a lot of those things to do some work on it. And, in the notes, I'll put in whatever I think the solution is or what I think they need to do to fix it. And at the bottom, I'll put my name and my job title in. So not only do people know who added these notes, but also the people who matter further down the line when they need to know who solved the problem, my name will be there. They'll be able to find it if they're looking for it. But I'm not going to go around and send an email to the vice chancellor at the university and say, hey, you know what I did this week? Because I don't think he would care.
That would also never happen.
No, that would never
Not
happen.
your style.
And I think that's the word that I was looking for, that they always told, visibility. That's the word. And
Yeah.
some managers will say, hey man, here's a project. It'll be good for you. It'll be high visibility. Now they weren't the kings, but they were the king's men. And they would come to me and say, hey, do this. So it'll give you good visibility. So that's different, because the king may not be calling you, but the king's men are the one calling you. And eventually the king ends up seeing you, or your boss, right? Your manager, whatever, the director, because of those things. So maybe I didn't make myself clear, is that and you said it, Jay, it doesn't mean you don't have to be ambitious and all these things. I guess what I'm saying is, you don't have to put in, because some people at work you can literally see that they're trying really hard to put themselves in front of the king. Right. Look at me. While others, it may be a slower progression, but I think a more stable progression, as the scriptures, I think, allude to that, where it's just better to be called and then you execute and you perform to that duty. And then that's better than trying to insert yourself where you shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Just to be seen.
Yep.
Yeah. I used to work, I've been telling a lot of work stories the last few weeks, but I used to work with another systems administrator not in my department, in another department where we actually had to work together on a number of projects. And this person had lots of certifications, a degree, I think a master's degree in information technology, had been working for the university for 15, 20 years, and was always telling people how much they knew. I've been here this long. I know all these systems. I know all these people. And in that department, this person everybody was afraid of them. Like, this person knows everything and they will shut you down if you say something stupid. And the director of that department, any IT questions that he had, he would go to this person, would not listen to anybody else, because this person was constantly telling the director how much they knew compared to everybody else. Nobody else knows what they're doing. Everybody else is incompetent. And that got them a long ways. They kept that job for a long time. But then when that director retired, and somebody else who knew what this person was doing from the outside, was observing this for years, when that person took over the department, that person was the first one to go. That kind of behavior, even if you fool some people, you're not going to fool everybody by making yourself, putting yourself in front of the king and making yourself look bigger than you really are. Other people are going to see it, and it's going to come back to you.
I took that verse a little bit differently. I know that advice is sometimes appreciated, but unasked advice usually isn't appreciated. So if the king is seeking input, and it talks about, let's see, when he says, come here, well, then he's looking for your input. He may not use it, but at least it shows that he'll ponder it. Whereas unasked for advice is well, it's going to be frustrating to you because you know it all, and it's like, hey, all you need to do is this. But it could also be very embarrassing to have your advice be not followed. It outlines where exactly you stand, you know?
Yeah, that's good. I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's true. Anyone got another one they want to talk about before we wrap it up? I'm not in a rush to get out, so I just don't want to keep everybody longer than you want to be here.
Last one for me, and kind of a one that I've been trying to practice for a while, and it's verse 15, and it says, with patience a ruler may be persuaded, and a soft tongue will break a bone. But through Proverbs, it does speak about being gentle on the way you speak, regardless of how you're being spoken to. And I've been working on that for many years. Not that I'm hard to talk to or that I'm rough when I try to express myself or anything like that. At least I didn't think so. But maybe because my tone or sternness or my directness or maybe even lack of empathy or something like that, that it may come out too strong maybe. But I've been working on just being a lot calmer and gentler with the way I speak, especially at work, and learning not to say more than I should, even if my flesh feels like saying more. And I do the same thing even in my own household. I try to do that when I speak to the wife, the kids, my parents, and just being really gentle in the way I speak and not showing my frustration, but not like an act. I've been I've been praying for that as well, that he may make my heart, a little bit more gentle and calm, because I think because of my life experiences and my past, I think that I've just came to the point where I was always like wired all the time. And I think that feeling of being wired all the time, like I always had to be like full blown energy sometimes, and it just would come out the wrong way. And of course, the one who knows you better is your wife, so she will point those things out, and I'm like, yeah, I can totally see that, but I would get upset because I don't mean it that way. That's it's not my heart to be that way. But like I always say, it's what people perceive. Like perception is so important. So that when I read that in the Proverbs verses just like that, I've come into proof in the last probably year. Like I've been working it for a year, but the last year I've been seeing the results of me being calm and patient and not raising my voice and not looking frustrated and being gentle and picking my words correctly. And I'm seeing how the other person, it happened today. Like somebody just thanked me for getting back to them. And I was just baffled by this person doing that, right? And it happened twice today, actually. And then, which how corporate America is, they're cut dry. But this lady, she emailed me and she's like, thank you for being so nice to me. And I wasn't trying to be nice to her, like in a sense of, because I'm trying to get something out of her or anything like that, work related, right? But I told her, I said, well, it's easy to be nice to you because you're a nice person yourself. But I hope that, and I was speaking to myself in a sense, but telling her that I hope that I'm nice to others, even when they're not nice to me. And I've worked on that the last few years when I get bad service in a restaurant, when somebody cuts me on the road. And it shows people, I think, because it doesn't matter. Look, one thing about this community is that everybody is so well read and versed in compared to everybody else. Like we can talk about scriptures left and right, up and down all day long. And most people are not like that in other communities. But who cares? Though everybody else around us, we can know the scriptures left and right. It doesn't matter. I'm telling you right now, guys.
Right.
It
Right.
doesn't matter unless we speak with gentleness, with steadfast love, with kindness, being merciful, forgiving people. Like those things are so much more valuable, and it touches the heart more of people, and it really shows Yeshua more than me telling you all the other things that us in this community hold tight to, and some of them
Yeah.
tight to the point that it squeezes out everything else, right?
Mhm.
So there's, and I mean this word, there's this beautiful balance of the letter of the law, but spirit of the law as well.
Mhm.
And being able to merge both of them together in that manner. And that is a very conscious action that we all have to like pursue every day, because I think it's great that we're all here together. I mean, it's so important that even if we know the scriptures as well as we do in comparison to what we may think other people do, like you were talking about, Jay, like I don't understand. And I think me and you have had these comments, like I just don't get it, why they don't see it, because finally when I just read it myself, I got it. And I'm nothing special. So I just don't understand why other people don't get it either. But it's them seeing you change through time through the word, and just being so loving to everyone, and not being seeing that, depending on who you are, being flustered on things, and seeing that there's this change in your heart and in your ways, and letting things go. And it does take time for others, but that is going to draw people more over your way than anything else you can do. It doesn't matter, right? Like for me it does, because I just don't, I'm maybe less emotional. But if you give me scriptures and you just tell me, just listen to me, man, hear this, and I think about it, yeah, that's attractive to me. The kindness part, of course it is, but maybe not as much, or maybe hopefully there's a balance there. But for everybody else, is just being so like loving and kind with your words. And I think while I was going through the words, through the scriptures back and forth, I can't remember where I was at, but I think it was, let me see if I can quickly find it. No, I'm not going to find it, but it was saying something about that we have to encourage each other.
Yeah, go to verse 12. You just outlined verse 12.
Okay.
Like
Well,
a gold ring or an ornament of gold is a wise reprover to a listening ear. That's really kind of just what you said.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah.
Verses 11 and 12
Yeah,
are,
it's 11 and 12.
Yeah.
they are kind of like mirror images of each other, where the first one is saying a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in a setting of silver.
Right.
So this is a wise or some encouraging word. And then on the other side, like a gold ring or an ornament of gold is a wise reprover to a listening ear. Verse 11 was talking about, the person bringing the words was beautiful to the one hearing. And then in the second one, it was the one who's willing to hear who is beautiful to the one speaking. That's still true that, someone who is receptive to good advice that's like a cold drink of water, to borrow another one of the Proverbs in this chapter. Someone who will actually hear you when you've got something to say to them, versus someone who just gets mad or misunderstands you, or assumes that you're saying something not. But I'm not sure why I read that verse backwards. Maybe that's just what I needed to learn. I don't know. Yet what you're saying also reminded me of James 3, where he talks about how the tongue is like a rudder that steers a ship, and it can steer you straight into the rocks.
Mhm.
I don't think he says it that way exactly, but he says,
Something like that, though. Yeah.
all kinds of animals, birds, and reptiles are being tamed and have been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It's a restless evil full of deadly poison. He was being hyperbolic there. I mean, because he goes on in the next few verses to talk about taming the tongue. So it is possible to tame the tongue, but it's hard work. It's really difficult.
Very
But this
different.
idea that the tongue is full of deadly poisons are also medicines. Too much of something is poison, but in the right amount at the right time, it's a medicine that can heal or bring peace. So when you do have tame that tongue, like when it's talking about in Proverbs 15 about, through patience a ruler may be persuaded, and a soft tongue can break a bone. It's talking about it in a good way. It's not talking about you can use gentle words to hurt people. That's not the point. The point is there's power in a gentle word. And if there is power in a word harshly spoken, there is also power of a different kind in a word gently spoken at the right time.
Well, I'll tell you from experience that I have at times shut down
Mhm.
and chosen not to speak a word because I did not wish to provoke or antagonize or create a difficult situation. And unfortunately, that in and of itself was creating a situation.
But it
So
could have been worse if you would have spoken properly. So it's
what's
just
that?
but if you would have spoken, it may have been worse if you would have said something.
Well,
So
that's why I
even
was,
if you were quiet, it was painful.
yeah,
If you said something, it might have been worse. Yeah.
that's what I was trying to avoid. And sometimes that's misinterpreted as you're shutting down, you don't care, you're
You're
not
cold.
responding to my need,
Yep.
So I don't know how that interplays with it, but it does to a degree because it's talking about soft words. And if you don't use words, it can be a negative thing. So I'm thinking it's saying, yeah, sometimes you just need to speak gently and rather than be silent. I don't know how to do that sometimes. That's why I'd be silent.
Well, like
Mhm.
Jason, it takes practice to do that for sure. I'm still learning. I just wanted to say that as a sense of encouragement, but I don't know who may need that as listening, but it's just better to be soft-spoken and gentle. There's no need. I was thinking about that the other day. I think you have two choices. You can either speak gently or walk away, which is silence. And I think that's fine. I think the scriptures may even say, I can't think on top of my head, but I think we say there's time just to not say anything. I'm sure it
Right.
does. I think that's your two options, but saying nasty, mean things, that's not the right thing. And that's not my character either. I don't say those things anyway, but I think for me, it's just you can see the frustration in me, even if I wasn't saying bad things.
Mhm.
So taking it even a step further of, not showing the frustration and saying kind words, or not kind words, but soft words. That somebody, when somebody is cursing you out, what soft words can you say? It's not the easiest thing to do. You have to say it on the fly. You can't say well, I love you too, or something like that, to somebody that just cut you on the side of the road, right? Because that would sound sarcastic. And that's not something that I would say honestly. Somebody calls me, somebody cuts me on the side of the road, gives me the finger, it would be normal for me to say, well, I love you too. It's you can feel that, like, the sarcasm just oozing out of me, right? Because I like sarcasm. I think it's just hilarious. I see it as a sense of comedy. But
Mhm.
that somebody in front of my face, it's just better not to say that. It's just better to maybe say, my apology, I didn't see you there. Even if that's not the case, even if that is that person's fault. but there's discernment that goes through that, and we can be all day talking about those things. But I think
Mhm.
take the high road, in other words, of just being gentle and kind and not let them see your frustration, because we're supposed to, and that's the thing. Like, there's so much responsibility. I've thought about this. There's so much responsibility once we make that covenant with him, and we've decided to take that word into our hearts and into our minds, because we're being put under a microscope, right? People constantly saying, "Oh, well, you think you're high and mighty." How many times have I said that I'm not? Like, I'm not. I'm the least.
You're a representative of him, and it's an awesome responsibility.
Yeah, it's
An
awesome.
intimidating responsibility too.
Intimidating. Yeah, I mean, very, very fearful, because you don't want to be a stumbling block to anyone. So taking
Mhm.
that seriously, it's like, okay, I need to be mind my P's and Q's. But it's healthy, to be quite honest with you. It's not, it's a wonderful thing, because if we're in him, we're supposed to have this shalom just oozing out of us at all times, right? Because we're in peace. Because if well, you tell me you believe in the creator of the heavens, the earth, and the seas, right? That he'll be the provider of everything, that you will not need anything, right? So why are you afraid of losing your job, or that things are not going well, or what's going to happen tomorrow, or anything like that? You have to be in this consistent peace. Now, I'm human. That's not always the case, but it's better than, it's a challenge, I think, for all of us, because again, it doesn't matter how long my seats are, and it doesn't matter that I carry the scriptures around all the time wherever I go. But if I'm not showing, reflecting what the word says outside, then it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They're not going to get it. Like, there's less grace and mercy on them to us than the other way around, maybe.
You were talking about poison in the tongue. There's something interesting I was thinking about when he's talking about the poison on the tongue, people poisoning other people with their tongues, lashon hara, with curses, and like talking about cursing somebody out, and there's a Hebraic difference between curse words and profanity that we look at. Curse words are intended to cause harm, like saying, I wish you would, so and so, or this person is going to jump off a cliff, etc., etc. That's actually what the curse words actually are. But what we speak, we call curse words, is profanity. It's
crude.
it's not holy. It's not a holy tongue that we're speaking when we're saying bad words. But the targeting of word, I mean, you could say something like, something bad to somebody and wish ill harm on them. That's where you get into the curse aspect. Like, look at what happened with Balaam, and he was going to curse Israel. He was asked to curse Israel with a powerful curse. He was a sorcerer, a very renowned sorcerer of that time. And the evil king, I think he asked him to go out and curse Israel about 3 times. Instead, he blessed him 3 times because God had threatened to take his life if he cursed him. And the donkey, bucked him. We know the story on that. But the cursing, the poison of the tongue, like you said, medicinal, too much medicine, it can be poison. If you're constantly trying to give information, helpful information, you're poisoning them because you're spoiling them. They're not learning things on their own. You only want to belay so much information that makes them search out the truth. That goes for even speaking the gospel or witnessing to people. You don't want to give them dump in a whole bunch of information like casting pearls before swine kind of thing, because you're actually poisoning their potential walk with God. They only need to hear about Yeshua and the gospel. And if they reach out, back out, and then they start learning, that's where you can continue to give them information. Because if not, they're going to close their hearts, they're going to close their minds, and they're not going to give an inch. And I've been in that boat many, many times with people. It's sad,
Yeah.
but it's just the way people are.
Yeah, good word, Daniel. I wanted to bring up one more proverb. Solomon had a lot to say about speech. It's one of like the three top topics through the whole book of Proverbs. And this chapter is full of when to speak, when not to speak, how to speak. Verses 21 and 22. If your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat, and if he is thirsty, give him water to drink. For you will heap coals of fire on his head, and Adonai will reward you. Got the TLV version up right now. Most of this chapter is about what to say and what not to say and what circumstances. And this is probably intended to be understood in that context, although, I mean, it certainly applies far beyond that. So when somebody does something evil to you, if you respond it with kindness instead of in kind with evil, it says you're going to heap coals of fire on his head. And I've heard a couple of different explanations for that. The first one is it's going to make him, it's like a passive aggressive revenge. Paul quotes this in Romans. I think this is Romans. Yeah, in Romans chapter 12. And he says, don't take revenge. On the contrary, and then he quotes this verse, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing so, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. So this is clearly, at least Paul understood, that this is not talking about taking revenge. And I've heard other teachers say that this is about, how people used to carry burdens. And, they'd have a basket or a bowl on their heads, and they carry hot coals from one place to another. And, one of the good things you can do for your enemy is you can give him some of the coals from your fire, and he can take it home, and, he can use that in his house. That just doesn't fit the context of the verse, because it says, by doing good to him, you will heap coals of fire on his head. So the coals of fire is not the good thing you're doing to him. That's the result of the good thing. What I think it's really saying is you're going to disrupt whatever he was trying to do. You're going to throw him into chaos, and he's not going to know how to react. I mean, what would you do if somebody dumped a pile of coals on your head? Well, you wouldn't be attacking them. You'd be backing up and batting the coals off your head. And I think Solomon's point with this verse is to say, if somebody does something evil to you, if they're trying to hurt you, and you respond by being kind to them, you're going to throw them off their game. You're going to throw them off their attack. And, maybe they'll get mad and attack you again. But there's also a good chance that they're going to stop and think, what is going on here? And give you a chance to have some reason, some dialogue with this person.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a law too. It's in the Tanakh, right? It's a law that tells you how to treat your enemy. And I think you do have to, and all this other stuff. And that's a tactic that the United States used differently than everybody else. Once they became a superpower, they treated the enemy like people were. I think I can't remember what battle, whatever, but I think I remember hearing maybe it was a German said they were going to give up, but they were like, to who? The Russians or the Americans? Like, no, man, let's go back that way. Even we have to go further back, but let's just give ourselves to the Americans. And the allegiance that came afterwards between the Germans and the Americans afterwards, it's known. But they purposely, they gave them they divulged all kinds of information after World War II, the Germans to the Americans, because they knew that the Americans would treat them much better than the Russians would. So it makes sense.
Yeah. West Germany became a prosperous country, while East Germany became a third world whole.
Yep.
And West Germany has been one of our closest allies ever since. I mean, maybe not so much today as over the last 50 years, but for the last 80 years, however long it's been.
It's a very foreign concept. I had my friend Tamir relay this story to me, and I still to this day, I scratch my head thinking about it. But he, being Jewish, applied this literally. He had a waitress that gave him horrible service, and he gave her a $50 tip. And I'm like, why'd you do that? I wanted her to think about it. It was a
Mhm.
concept very different from from my experience and my response, but it was unique for sure. I have no idea if she thought about it or not, but definitely an interesting approach.
Yeah, if she was conscious of the bad service she was giving, then I'll bet she did think about that.
Right. Like
Yeah.
if you see it, I've done this before. If you see that they're just having a bad day, or and they just took it out on you service wise, I've done that. I've given a nice tip, which I don't know whatever happened with that, right? But there's times where there's this conscious effort, or there's this either conscious effort or just don't care about the service. That's a
Mhm.
whole different story, I think.
Yeah. I wasn't there. I don't know the particulars, but his
No, no,
story
no. Yeah,
intrigued
that's a
me.
great story. No, I agree.